Hey everyone, it's KB with Pile Driver Wrestling Podcast. Hey, I hope you're having a great week so far. We're going to get into some old school wrestling. Now, you know my motto. If you watch these, you know what I always say. The old school paved the way for the new school. And I believe that. I believe that's why we're watching who we're watching today, because the old school brought us to where we're at today, to the present champions and the present wrestlers that we see on television today. So today we're going to honor a future Hall of Famer, But before we get into all that, I'm just going to ask that you click, like, and subscribe these videos. Turn on those notifications. That way you'll never miss anything right here on the PDR podcast. Well, we're going to dig on into Lex Luger for the old school Friday. Lex Luger was one of my favorites. He was kind of named after Lex Luthor off of Superman. If you know anything about Lex Luger, he was just a guy who had all the physique, man. This guy seemed like he didn't have a bit of fat on his body. He was just that guy. He was 6'6", 275 pounds. This was a big guy, man. I mean, he was bigger than life. He wrestled some of the greats, and we're going to kind of get into his accomplishments. But if you know Lex Luger, you will know that he's known as the Total Package. His finishing move was the torture rack. But he was also maybe some areas you may not know that what he did in his career. We're going to kind of dig into that as well. So he played football. You may or may not know that, but he actually played for the University of Miami, which I didn't know that until I started looking at his accomplishments and history and stuff. So he actually played for the University of Miami. He actually went on to play for the Canadian League. He also signed with the Green Bay Packers. Now, he didn't play for him. He didn't get any starting time, but he actually signed with the Green Bay Packers for a couple of years. He played in the USFL League. So Lex was very talented. He wasn't just a wrestler. He was a bodybuilder. He was a professional football player. He was a professional wrestler. So Lex has a lot of accomplishments that we're going to kind of really get into. Some things that you may or may not know, but it's just really interesting facts. And like I always say, go on YouTube, watch some of his matches, watch some of the things that Lex has accomplished in his career and stuff. So we're going to kind of get into that, but he was part of the Four Horsemen. You know that. You know that it was part of the Elite. So Lex was part of the Four Horsemen. Of course, later he got kicked out. Him and Flair would always fight. He also was a part of the NWO Wolfpack, which was another elite group, the Wolfpack. But this was Kevin Nash and Scott Hall's group. You had the red versus, it became a two-sided monster where you had the red versus the black. If you remember the NWO, too sweet, so NWO Wolfpack, he joined them to try to take down Hogan. He fought Hogan, but this guy was also with Barry Windham. Remember I talked about on old school wrestling podcast here a while back, we talked about Barry Windham? Well, actually, he teamed up with him. Barry Windham actually helped train Lex Luger. Matter of fact, because he didn't, this is an interesting fact that I found out. Because he didn't play, if his career would have taken off in professional football with the Green Bay Packers, he would never become a wrestler. Because he didn't, that career never took off, he was able to become a wrestler. And actually, one of the people to train him was Barry Windham. So that was a cool, interesting fact that I didn't know. But it's interesting that they also tagged up and was known as the Twin Towers. If you remember back in the day, the Twin Towers, that was Lex Luger and Barry Windham actually teaming up. But Lex was also a United States heavyweight champion, a U.S. heavyweight champion. He was a WCW World Heavyweight Champion. He never did a whole lot in WWE as far as hold championships. But he did play a huge part, and we're going to get into that in a second. But if you know, he transferred into he was in NWA, then WCW, and then he transferred into WWF, which is WWE at the time. but he was known as the narcissist. And he would look himself in the mirror and talk about his physique and all. And his trainer was none other than, or his manager was none other than Bobby the Brain Heenan. But his character was phenomenal. And then, of course, he goes away and he redevelops his character to later become the All American. Now, I love when he was an All American. It kind of like when Hogan kind of jumped ship, he kind of fulfilled that role. I remember he was on. He was. There was a challenge. This body slam Yokozuna. If you're a wrestling fan out there, you'll remember this. But I remember because a lot of people thought it was Hogan that was getting off that helicopter. But all of a sudden, this helicopter shows up, and the fans are going crazy. They don't know who it is. And he gets off the helicopter. You can hear the people chanting, Hogan, Hogan, Hogan. But then somebody yells out, it's Lex, it's Lex. And then it come to find out it was Lex Luger. And he comes in, and he attempts to slam Yokozuna, and he has trouble at the beginning. But then he eventually slams him. And then that starts his whole, process of, he starts an All-American tour. So, man, he was just such a great athlete, man, to watch. I love watching Lex Luger, especially when he put people in the human torture rack behind and he would do his finishing move. It was just great entertainment. He was just a great in-ring performer. And let me just read off some of his accomplishments and what he accomplished to really show you what kind of athlete this guy was, okay? So he was most popular wrestler in 1993. He was the comeback of the year in 1993. That was around the time of the All-American. He was also the feud match of the year in 1887, 88, and 90. Man, that's when you can win it almost 3 years in a row. That's quite an accomplishment. He had the match of the year in 1991. He was the rookie of the year in 1996. And he was a wrestler of the year in 1997. So Lex Luger deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I know that Lex went down a dark path there for a while and was doing drugs, and he's got a great testimony. If you hadn't watched that, go watch his story. It's amazing in itself how God brought him back, and really he feels like he's got a great purpose, and he was taking prescription pills and so much pain. So you need to watch that. In wrestling, there's always kind of a darker side of things, and Lex loves to tell that story about how God saved him. And so it's just a really good story. And I love that, Lex is being inducted to the Hall of Fame. He's had some bad times, but now he's coming up to where he rightfully belongs, and that's into the Hall of Fame. And Lex, I just want to say, man, you inspired me to watch wrestling when I was a kid. I'll tell you a quick story, and then we'll end it, with this story. But Lex Luger was down in Dothan, Alabama, wrestling at the Civic Center down there in Dothan, Alabama, where I was raised in Alabama. But he was down there in Dothan, Alabama. He was wrestling none other than Ric Flair. Again, this guy's wrestled many, many people. I mean, you name it. Sting, been partners with Sting. You just look at the list of all the people he's wrestled. This guy's wrestled everybody. And so I remember being down there watching that match. I was probably about 11, 12, somewhere around in there. And the match, was going on with him and Ric Flair. And man, they had a great match like they always do. Him and Flair were good in the ring together. And he beats Flair. He actually beats Flair. But you know how the refs back in those days, they would say, no, he didn't actually win, off of some kind of DQ or something like that. So they gave the belt back to Ric Flair, of course. It wasn't televised at the time, but it just made it for good entertainment. And of course, Lex all upset. He's kicking the ropes and stuff. But what made it so unique, what made it so special was we were getting ready to leave, and they they held the line up. My dad was getting aggravated. He was like, what in the world? Who are we waiting on? The president? And little did we know, man, that Lex Luger would actually walk through the back where we were trying to get out. He would walk through there to go through, I guess, the locker room area at the time. And the guy, I kid you not, I remember this. The guy has to turn sideways and duck up underneath the frame of a door just to get into the locker room. Turn his shoulders now. This guy was massive. I seen it personally. I'll never forget it. And I remember my dad's eyes getting so big as saucers going, my Lord, son, did y'all see that? You know, and he gets all excited. I mean, it's something that you never forget. So, Lex, if you ever watch this, I don't know if you do, thank you for making wrestling so great. Thank you for all the great matches, and you deserve being in the Hall of Fame. Well, that's all we have on this week's segment on Old School Friday. We hope that you tune in next week as we talk about another old school legend. That's all I got on Pile Driver Wrestling Podcast.